Chapter 5. You reap what you sow. This proverb dates back thousands of years. It originates from the Bible in the book of Galatians 6:7. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, this he will also reap. This proverb simply means that the results you get are proportional to the time, energy, and deeds you put in. It works both ways. If you sow positive deeds, you will reap positive results, and if you sow negative deeds, you will reap negative results. These results may not come in the time that you expect them to, but they will definitely come sooner or later. The law of cause and effect. The law of cause and effect, which is universal, states that there is a specific cause for every specific effect. Many people make the mistake of thinking that this law only applies to the big decisions in life. The truth is, it applies to every single decision you make on a daily basis, be it big or small. The so-called small decisions are actually even more important in the long term, in my view. You may not feel their effect immediately, but they do add up and will eventually come down hard on you. Making a decision to eat fast food instead of a healthy meal will not immediately add an inch to your waist, and this is what tricks your brain into thinking it doesn't matter. If you do the same over a period of, say, 2 years, you bet that you'll look different because the effect happens gradually due to the small decisions adding up. I had a period in my life where I used to wonder where money was disappearing to. I knew that I was earning good enough to make a decent living, but yet I sometimes had what the late entrepreneur and motivational speaker Jim Rohn termed as more month at the end of the money. I could not understand it because I wasn't really buying any expensive things, or as I thought, not spending my money recklessly. I shared my thoughts with a friend of mine who then asked me to do the following: track my expenditure for at least 90 days. He told me to write down every single transaction, no matter how big or small. At first, I thought the idea was kind of silly. Not because it was, but because my ego was too big. It meant I had to ask for a receipt every time I bought something, even if it cost me just a few cents. Although I was skeptical, I decided to put his advice to practice because I thought to myself, I have nothing to lose anyway. After only 20 days, I was shocked to realize just how much these so-called little purchases added up. After the end of the 90 days, I sat down with my friend to analyze the data, and the shock was even greater. The small amounts I was spending without conscious thought were really doing damage to my finances. Tracking my finances opened my eyes to the fact that every single decision I make, no matter how small, affects the overall quality of my life. By not tracking my expenditure, the cause, I was having trouble living within my means, the effect. After realizing this, I decided to automate the transfer of a certain amount of my income to my savings account, and then track my finances to ensure that I live only on the rest of the money. I have never looked back since then. It has been an amazing journey, an eye-opener. An analogy to nature. When a farmer plants a seed, he doesn't say to himself, "That's it. I'll come back to check on it when it's grown up and then harvest it." The farmer knows that to have a good harvest, the seed has first of all to be planted in fertile soil, and then he would have to water the plant regularly. When it starts growing, there is also the danger of weeds. For the farmer to have a good harvest in the end, he has to deal with the weeds if the plants are to grow healthy and yield the maximum results. In other words, he does not just plant and then come back weeks or months later to reap. Rather, there is a lot of work in between in terms of nurturing the plant and making sure it grows healthy. Planting a seed in one's life is no different. For the seed to bear fruit, it has to be planted in fertile soil and be nurtured. This process can seem mundane and not very exciting. That's why many people give up on it. I can attest to this fact when I think of the time I started working on my finances. Writing down every single expenditure daily was not exciting at all. Asking for a receipt for every transaction, especially the little ones that cost a few cents, seemed to me outright strange. When I look back, however, I am so glad I did it. This seemingly mundane process was the nurturing my financial life needed to get back on the right track. George Washington Carver was born as a slave in Missouri, and his parents died during his infancy. He was then brought up by Susan and Moses Carver, the couple who owned his mother. Because he was frail as a child, he spent his days observing plants and nature around the house. He was so fascinated by plants that he was soon called the plant doctor. He left his home with the goal of pursuing education, and was able to do that and get a certificate. He moved to Kansas and worked as a casual laborer in order to save money for his higher education. George knew that this was the price he had to pay in order to attain his goal, and he was ready to pay it. He was sowing a seed for his career, for his future. Keep in mind that he grew up at a time when people of color had very few rights, if any. They faced a lot of discrimination, cruelty, and prejudice. After witnessing a fellow black man being lynched, he fled out of fear that he could be the next one. Even though he had been accepted at a college in Kansas, he was rejected on his arrival there because he was a black man. George did not give up. He worked hard, and after some time, he was able to save money for college in Iowa to study art. He was the only black student admitted out of 300 attendees. At this college, he felt welcome and accepted, and his obsession with and knowledge of plants impressed his art teacher, who encouraged him to pursue a major in horticulture. This led to his move to Iowa State Agriculture College, where he graduated in 1894. He did not stop at that. George pursued his master's degree at the same college and graduated in 1896. Here was a young man born in slavery, facing all kinds of obstacles, but one who knew instinctively that the sum of his deeds would determine what his future would look like. He did not fall into self-pity or negativity, even though he would have had reason to. He was determined to do what it takes to make his life better. He planted the seeds for his future despite the overwhelming obstacles in his path. He developed a mobile laboratory on wheels so that he could visit black farmers and encourage them to do crop rotation in order to preserve the nutrients in the soil. At that time, most farmers predominantly grew cotton in their farms year after year. He encouraged them to grow groundnuts instead. During this time, he also experimented in his Tuskegee laboratory. His success did not go unnoticed. One of the greatest automobile manufacturers of all time, Henry Ford, approached him for collaboration in developing alternative fuels with soybeans. This in itself was an amazing achievement, considering that black people at that time were not considered equal citizens and had very few, if any, human rights. Even the greatest of all inventors, Thomas Edison, had offered him a job. George politely declined because he felt he could create more value and help more poor farmers at Tuskegee. Back in those days, Thomas Edison was the man to work with as a scientist. Most young scientists would have jumped at the opportunity immediately. This great inventor approached George to offer him the job. George Washington Carver's amazing success was not a product of chance. He sowed his seeds through his thoughts and actions over a long period of time, and made sure he nurtured the plant till it bore some fruit. All the recognition and accolades were his harvest. He was reaping what he had sown. His life would have taken a totally different path had he sowed other seeds or failed to follow the courage of his convictions. He proved that even though he had no control over where he was born and how he was raised, his thoughts and actions, which he had control over, were the ones that in the end determined his future. We all love reaping. When we read or hear about someone who has succeeded in whatever field, there is a tendency for most humans to proclaim how lucky the individual is. We see the fruit and focus on it, forgetting that there was a path that he or she had to take to get there. The fruit in that person's hands did not appear miraculously. It may have taken months or even years to get there. We all love reaping the harvest, but many hate the work and effort it takes to attain it. The primitive instinct of instant gratification that is in all of us tempts men and women into making decisions that can jeopardize their futures. Get-rich-quick schemes make hundreds of millions of dollars every year feeding on this instinct. Those who organize these schemes know of this weakness in their fellow humans, and therefore entice them with incredible promises, which include testimonies of those who did what their scheme says, and then became instant millionaires. The sad thing is that even though it has been proven time and again that such schemes are a hoax, many still fall for it. Aware of this, private or state lotteries also play their part in taking a share of the hard-earned money of individuals. Even people who do not usually save money and invest are ready to regularly spend a lot of money hoping to hit the jackpot. The chances of winning are, of course, very minimal, 1 in several million. But people will still keep investing their money in lottery tickets. For everyone who wins, millions of others lose their money. So, if the lottery pays the winners, say, 40 million, they have probably earned 200 million. They literally feed on the hope of people to instantly become rich. The best way to predict one's future is to create it by having a goal and working on it every day. This, of course, takes time, which is why it is not so enticing for people. When bamboo is planted, no change in growth is visible for a whole year. This does not mean nothing is happening, but rather, the roots are growing and getting established. In year 2, however, new shoots emerge, and the plant can grow up to 4 feet per day. When we lay the foundation for a future, we may not see any visible change for a long time. Most people would interpret that as a sign that they should give up, but this time is not in vain. The roots are being established, and character building is taking place. When the roots are established and you gain momentum, you will be amazed at how things will go your way. A nurse in Australia who had worked in a hospice for many years helping and comforting terminally ill people interviewed many of them, especially the elderly. One of the main questions she asked was whether, looking back, there was something they wished they had done more. It is interesting to note that none of them mentioned that they wished they had spent more time in the office, or earned more money, or went up the career ladder. Most of them wished they had spent more time with their loved ones, their spouses, children, and so on. On their deathbeds, they realized they had spent most of their time with things that had seemed important to them at the time they were doing them, but it ultimately did not matter the most. Developing a strong bond with loved ones requires taking time to be around them and interact with them. As far as children are concerned, experts believe that the first 7 years are the most important as far as having an impact on their lives is concerned. If the bond is not developed before their teenage years, it is very hard for the parents to catch up after that. Some parents try to overcompensate by providing their children with all, and even excessive, material needs, believing that they can build bonds this way. Needless to say, this approach backfires most of the time because children can sense that the emotional bond is missing. This can only be achieved by viewing parenthood as a priority and therefore saying no to all things that would distract one from spending quality time with the family. We are creatures of habit. The major difference between those who yield positive results and those who yield negative ones are habits. A majority of the time, our brains switch to autopilot in order to save energy. This makes sense. Just imagine how life would be if you were to consciously think of every step you make while walking, or think of every knot you tie while tying your shoelace. If you have been a driver for a long time, for example, there is a lot you have to do simultaneously without thinking. Scientists estimate that our brains are on autopilot 95% of the time. This can be good or bad news depending on how your subconscious mind has been programmed. Or, to put it in simple terms, depending on what habits you have. Simply because it is these habits that add up and determine your results. So, how do we create new habits? One of my mentors once told me to take time to think of habits in my life that I believed to be a hindrance to my goals. I then had to jot them down on a piece of paper. After that, I had to write down actions that I believed would make a huge difference in my life and be supportive of my goals. I started working on these actions one by one until I formed new habits around them. That, of course, did not happen overnight. It took quite some time. Experts estimate that if an action is performed consistently for at least 21 days, the brain accepts it as a new habit. My personal experience was that you may need up to between 60 and 90 days for it to solidify. It is important to note that this is only if you are consistent. We all definitely reap what we sow in life. My grandfather used to tell me that there are consequences for every decision in life, and that before making a decision, I should ask myself whether I can live with the consequences of that decision. He was right.